If any house in California deserves to be haunted, it's this one, the John Marsh Mansion located near the San Francisco Bay Area. Constructed in 1856 by early California settler John Marsh, this stone building sits on land that seems somewhat cursed. Violent murders and robberies were committed on the ranch. Wife Abby chose the spot for the mansion, however she died of tuberculosis in August 1855 before it was completed. 3 weeks after he and young daughter Alice moved into the mansion, John Marsh was murdered 30 miles away. Join us on this episode of History Hunters as we visit the site of the Marsh Mansion near Brentwood and visit the roadside scene of his murder near Pacheco, California. Security cameras in use. Mansion's over that way.
I'm going to turn around so that I can, and then I'll face the other way inside of that.
So welcome to this episode of History Hunters. We are just outside of the John Marsh Mansion and it is locked up. We're not able to get into it, but I want to talk to you a little bit about this ranch. In 1837, Dr. John Marsh acquired this ranch of 13,000 acres in exchange for just $300 worth of cowhide. Rancho Los Magaños originally had a small adobe home on it. Dr. Marsh was born in 1799 in South Danvers, Massachusetts. He settled in Michigan, where he established a school. He then settled in Wisconsin, where he was involved with the Sioux Indian Wars as an arms supplier. He fled the state for Independence, Missouri, where he established and operated his own store. In about 1836, he headed out on the Santa Fe Trail with the American Fur Company, eventually ending up in Los Angeles. Though he had no formal medical training, Marsh was the first known doctor to practice medicine in California. He lent his support to the movement to wrestle California away from Mexico and join American statehood. Marsh had a reputation for taking advantage of people by overcharging for services. His reputation as a cruel ranch owner, often underpaying and even beating ranch hands who disappointed him, led to his demise. It's said that the ranch was the unofficial end of the California immigrant trail, since some of those first settlers ended up here. Marsh was an advocate of bringing in a lot of American immigrants as a way of taking California from Mexico. In fact, he launched a letter-writing campaign espousing the California climate, soil, and other reasons to settle here, as well as the best route to take. His letters, which were passed around and printed in newspapers throughout the country, started the first big immigration push into California. He also invited the immigrants to stay on his ranch until they could get settled and assisted in obtaining passports. It was also said that in the 1840s, the nearest house to the east was about 1,000 miles away. The Bartleson-Bidwell party of immigrants ended up here on the ranch on November 4th, 1841. The party included John Bidwell, who became an important person in California politics. He was even the 1892 Prohibition Party candidate for president. Bidwell did not like Marsh, calling him one of the most selfish immortals. Other members of the party who arrived here included Nancy Kelsey, first American woman to cross the Sierra Nevada. And she's also considered the Betsy Ross of California, since she helped sew the bear flag, the symbol of revolt against Mexico. Other immigrants included Charles Weber, who became the founder of Stockton, California. It's believed that Abby Marsh is the one who selected the location for the mansion because she liked the view, being nestled in the foothills here. What's interesting is that in 2020, just over the ridge there are very tightly packed in houses, mini mansions, that have been constructed. Also off in the distance are some very unsightly power lines. Over here is Marsh Creek Road. And this is an indication of what kind of scrubby trees grow around here. There's some gently rolling foothills that start here to the south of the mansion. The valley is dry and dusty in the summertime, unlike the cool Bay Area to the west. Kind of wondering why Dr. Marsh didn't decide instead that he wanted to be on the coast of California. You can see down there a pretty massive tree that fell. Who knows, maybe it was here when he lived here. I doubt it. Dr. Marsh lived here 162 years ago. So I do want to check with Sarah. She called a little while ago and tried to get permission to enter the property. Did you hear back from anybody from the phone call?
No, it just says the John Marsh Mansion Trust or something.
Yeah. They're trying to raise money to restore that home. It's in pretty bad shape, I understand. So I'm sure it's a part-time effort, and I'm not sure that they're getting close to finishing it. It really amazes me that that wall that we can see from here looks like it's done with stucco.
You think that they would bring in interest and raise money by opening it up?
It was built completely of native stone, and it was inhabited by Dr. Marsh for 3 weeks. In 1837, Dr. John Marsh acquired this ranch of 13,000 acres in exchange for just $300 worth of cowhide. Rancho Los Magaños originally had a small adobe home on it. As with John Sutter, a growing number of squatters were taking Marsh's land and killing his cattle. In 1850, this ranch had been attacked by a band of outlaws led by Claudio Feliz, brother-in-law of the infamous Joaquin Murrieta. The attack occurred on December 5th, 1850, after Feliz spent a pleasant afternoon as the guest of Marsh. He returned that night with a dozen armed outlaws to capture Marsh, loot the adobe home, and spear to death visitor William Harrington. The bandits escaped with $300 in cash, gold watches, and guns. The attacks continued for years. On October 21st, 1854, Abby wrote, "I often think that we have more trouble than anybody besides us. Here the thieves and vagabonds are like wolves, waiting to tear you into pieces if you do not keep a sharp lookout for them. But I hope the Lord will give us grace and patience to wait for better days." In the summer of 1852, Dr. Marsh organized vigilantes against 2 squatters and cattle thieves, since the political power of the squatter faction in Contra Costa made legal remedies absolutely useless. Juries were tampered with and judges bribed. Marsh was arrested and convicted of conspiracy to commit assault and battery. The California State Supreme Court later overturned the conviction. Construction of the Gothic Revival-style home began in 1853 from stone cut from a nearby quarry. It consisted of 7,000 square feet and included a 65-foot tower, since the area was considered bandit country with no law enforcement agency at the time. An earthquake in 1868 severely damaged the stone tower, and it was rebuilt of wood. During its reconstruction in 2006, inspections showed that the roof was so damaged and leaky from rot that it was given a temporary cover of tin. An earthquake in the 1970s caused the rock south wall to collapse. It was replaced by a steel stud framed wall and covered in stucco to protect it until a matching stone exterior can be installed. The vaqueros that worked here, the Mexican cowboys, were not treated very well. So if he thought that they were doing something wrong, he would lash them with his whip. He would also not pay them what they thought that they were owed. And it's for that reason he was approached over near Pacheco, California. So he left here. He had some business over in Martinez. He asked his son for $300 in gold and silver. He put it in his pockets, and he got in his buggy, and he took off towards Martinez. He didn't make it. We're gonna go over and show you where he was stabbed to death. It was a very gruesome death, and there's a marker that shows you exactly where it took place. So we are out in front of GCR Tire Store on Pacheco Boulevard in Martinez, California. We're here for what's across the street, where this historical marker tells us this is where Dr. John Marsh was murdered, stabbed to death on September 24th, 1856. The story is that Mr. Marsh was coming from this direction of Pacheco in his buggy when he was met by the 3 vaqueros who worked for him. Their names were Felipe Marino, Jose Olivas, and Juan Garcia. They confronted him up the road and decided to rob him because they felt like he hadn't paid them enough according to their efforts. They demanded money, and he said he didn't have any when he really did. He told them he would pay them back at the ranch, but 19-year-old Marino was a brash individual. He pulled out his knife and stabbed Dr. Marsh. Marsh grabbed the knife with his hand, and then Marino pulled it away. Marsh's palm and his fingers were slashed. He took off in the buggy again and got to this spot where things got more violent. It was a bloody attack. Olivas turned state's evidence against Marino in a trial that took place 10 years later. He testified about how they commandeered the buggy. Olivas grabbed the head of the horse, stopped the buggy right here. Marsh was stabbed and fell to the ground, likely hitting his face. He staggered over here a couple of feet and died in this ditch. This ditch was supposedly dug by a Colonel Jilt to protect his fence. I'm not sure what that meant, but that's what the newspaper report said. What happened was Dr. Marsh's team took off. The buggy was found 4 o'clock in the morning in Martinez. Somebody thought that was strange. The cushions on the buggy were in disarray and there were muddy footprints in it. So they decided to come looking for the owner of it. They came up here a couple of miles and they found the bloody body of Dr. John Marsh right here. It was reported that they took the $300 to $400 worth of gold coins after rifling through his pockets. They climbed to one of the nearby hills so they could split up the loot. I'm guessing that this is the hill where the three men came up here to divide their riches. Said that Dr. Marsh had a trial back east, back in Minnesota, with a French Indian woman. His name was Charles. When he found out that he had a father out here in California, he decided to come looking for him. Just before Dr. Marsh was killed, they had a reunion. When Charles found out that his father was killed, he decided to come looking for his father's murderers, and it took him quite a while. So you can imagine these guys that just killed the doctor, and they probably were able to figure that they could hide up in this area on the hill, just in case somebody came upon the body of Dr. Marsh down there. Wouldn't it be something if we could find that they dropped some of the gold up here? It'd be pretty cool to take a metal detector and come look for it. So this would be the nearest hill. Here we are 160 something years later. We've got houses all over the place. So you can call Dr. Marsh a scoundrel, but I can't imagine anybody dying the way that he died. Tremendously tragic. His injuries included being stabbed in the face, stabbed in the torso, stabbed in the side. During one of the stabbings, he cried out in pain. Now, Olivia said that he tried to stop Marino from doing it. He was 25 years old at the time. Marino, the murderer, was 19, and didn't work. He was unable to fight off Marino. Marino was found guilty and he was sentenced to life in San Quentin prison. I wonder if these cattails were growing here back in 1856 when it happened. This is September 25th, 2020, so it's like a day away from the actual calendar day that he was murdered. And it was about the same time of day that Dr. Marsh was murdered, about 4 or 5 o'clock. Dr. Marsh would have been headed that direction toward Martinez, but this is as far as he got. You can just imagine that right here, finding a body. The authorities took the body to the courthouse in Martinez where they studied the wounds. It was really a tragic event, 3 against 1, which took out a man who played such a key role in bringing immigrants to California. Today's often forgotten history books. The day after the murder, there was an arrest when Jose Olivas came clean and was convicted, but he escaped from jail and eluded capture until September of 1866 when they found him in Santa Barbara County. About the same time, Felipe Marino was captured and went on trial in Sacramento. The third suspect, Juan Garcia, escaped justice. This monument went up actually a year before I was born, so that's kind of interesting. This little bottle of liquor here reminds me that Marino's anger may have been fueled by alcohol during the attack. Court testimony indicated that the 3 vaqueros had attended church in Martinez that morning and then went to Pinole in the company of some women later in the day. It's very possible that they stopped off at a saloon and were on their way back to the ranch when they spotted Marsh. I was able to read some of the testimony from the Sacramento Union newspaper account from the trial of 1867. Somewhere in this soil here is the blood of one of California's earliest immigrants and promoters, 56-year-old Dr. John Marsh, right across the street from a modern tire store. The tragic slaying of her father left 4-year-old Alice Frances Marsh an orphan. The sadness of losing both her mother and father in a short time was evident in a solemn portrait of her clutching onto flowers. Half of her father's vast holdings went to Alice, while the other half went to Charles from the first marriage. What became of Alice? In 1871, she married William Walker Cameron, who quickly sold her father's mansion and ranch. The marriage produced 2 daughters, one of whom died at a young age. During the next 2 years, Cameron built an elegant 22-room mansion in Oakland and started the Bank of Martinez. Cameron invested in unwise land developments and lost his wife's fortune. Bill's abusive nature, fueled by problems with alcohol, caused her to divorce him. She moved to Santa Barbara, where she raised her surviving daughter. She never remarried. When Alice passed away in 1927, her body was buried in Oakland's Mountain View Cemetery next to her parents she last knew as a child. Charles Marsh, the other child from a previous marriage, died in 1901.